Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Good morning, 9:15. Welcome to the programme. This programme has discovered that some staff at a private ambulance company have had as little as 1 hour's training to drive under blue lights. NHS trusts are increasingly using companies and charities to respond to emergency calls when they don't have available crews themselves. The private ambulance company based in Basildon in Essex has a contract to respond to 999 calls for the NHS Ambulance Trust in the east of England, as well as emergency transport between some hospitals. Whistleblowers have told this programme about a lack of training, dirty conditions in the vehicles and inappropriate equipment. The company denies the allegations and says all its staff have appropriate qualifications. Our reporter James Melly has been investigating.
An hour's training. That was it.
1 hour's training?
1 hour's training on blue lights, that's it.
It was quite clear that I was working with people that weren't trained, they weren't competent in the job.
And now I've got to find a way of living without him.
When we dial 999 for a medical emergency, most people expect NHS ambulances and their highly trained crews to respond. But increasingly, as NHS trusts struggle to meet demand, private companies are stepping in to take their place. One of these companies is the private ambulance service, which is based in Basildon in Essex. It carries out work like taking patients to hospital appointments, transferring sick people between hospitals, and it also provides cover for 999 calls for the East of England NHS Ambulance Trust. But whistleblowers have told us staff aren't properly trained and the equipment they use is not up to scratch.
Now, a woman is taking legal action against an ambulance trust after it sent a private...
The private ambulance service was in the news last year after the Essex coroner criticised it over the death of 54-year-old Gary Page. One of the company's crews responded to a call saying he was suffering chest pain.
Then he said, "I think it's my heart." She put the stethoscope on his chest and said, "Everything sounds fine."
They ran tests and said Mr. Page had got indigestion or had a hurt muscle and didn't take him to hospital. He later died having suffered a heart attack.
And now I've got to find a way of living without him. And I don't want to.
Mrs. Page's solicitor, Stephanie Pryor, is seeking compensation for her.
What has the impact been on Kim Page, Gary Page's death?
Devastating. I don't think any words can describe how Kim feels on a daily basis. Preparing for Christmas was very hard for her. She also had a family wedding in America. I actually spoke to her when she was in America the night before the wedding, and she was really in a bit of difficulty with the whole process of attending the wedding with Gary's family and Gary not being there.
What have you found out about the way the private ambulance service operates?
Well, I've been contacted by various individuals who were former employees of the private ambulance service, who were worried about the safety of patients. One particular former employee had reported them to the Care Quality Commission twice to no avail.
We've spoken to several people that work or have worked for the private ambulance service. Paul would only speak to us if we disguised his identity. He worked for PAS as a medic, but lost his job last year.
So what was it like when you started working there?
Surprising, I never had any induction or training. Pretty much just, sent out and that was it.
So you had no induction, no training?
No. It was quite clear that I was working with people that, not through their own fault, that weren't trained, they weren't competent in the job, and they certainly weren't confident in dealing with situations. In particular, on the ambulance side, coming across what we call running calls, so you come across a patient, quite a few staff didn't know how to respond. didn't know how to take simple things like blood sugars, ECGs, didn't know how to do manual blood pressures. Basic stuff, really.
Is there an example where that happened that you were particularly, that sticks in your mind?
Yeah, we drove out of a hospital one day doing PTS or patient transport service work, and there was a lady collapsed in the entrance to a hospital. And the colleague I was with at the time didn't have a clue what to do. As I say, she didn't know how to take a blood sugar, how to read ECGs, how to even do an ECG. I ended up treating the patient, by which time other crews coming out of the hospital ended up assisting us. Well, it's putting patients at risk. It's putting lives at risk. It's delaying what can be time-critical first aid, patient care.
We started to hear more disturbing stories about a lack of basic training for staff at the private ambulance service. Dan Duke worked at the company in patient transport until 2013, when he was sacked. The job could require him to drive under blue lights when taking an emergency patient between different hospitals.
What training were you actually given in order to drive under blue lights?
An hour's training. That was it.
1 hour's training?
1 hour's training on blue lights, that's it. All I done was got in the vehicle, got everything ready, started to drive out, put the blue lights on, and then it was just drive all the way down the A127, keep going down. But at that time it was about 4 o'clock, so there was quite a bit of traffic, so it was having to go through the traffic and everything like that, and then all the way along the seafront, and then back along the seafront up towards Leigh-on-Sea, back onto the A127, and then into Basildon trading estate from where they were based at. But it wasn't, there was like cars everywhere. He told me once that there's a sharp corner coming up when you come off the end of the seafront and go round towards up. There's a sharp turning. He told me to don't forget about that turning, but I already know it's there. So, but that was the only thing he really said to me about my blue light training. He didn't really tell me what to do or anything like that. He just gave me everything, said put the blue lights on and off you go, sort of thing.
I think that's astonishing.
It is astonishing.
Dan Duke says he now works for another ambulance company where he receives comprehensive training. The private ambulance service says its staff are fully qualified above the required standard. In law, emergency service staff can break certain rules of the road if they're properly trained or are being trained. So what is an acceptable level of training to drive under blue lights? The East Midlands NHS ambulance service let me watch it train its staff on its 4-week course.
Just change that siren again to the phaser, just as that attention grabber. They've stopped, they've seen you, that's good. Left hand indicator, left hand mirror as we come out, make sure no blank support on the side. Nice and slow in case we come across one of these. Good, white car seeing you.
What kind of dangers do ambulance drivers have to be aware of when they're driving under blue lights?
If you imagine everything that's on the road or by the side of the road is a potential hazard, and it's a potential hazard to us. So some of the particular ones would be, as you'd expect, going through red traffic lights. We've got an exemption under law to treat a red traffic light as a giveaway, essentially. So we can proceed at a slow walking pace through those traffic lights with maximum observation all around to make sure it's safe to proceed on through. Of course, the other traffic that's crossing us have got the green lights, so they have got priority, and we can only proceed if they will yield to us.
In your opinion, would it be possible to train somebody to drive under blue lights with an hour a day of training?
I mean, the fact that our whole course is 4 weeks long, and the first 2 weeks are the foundation, if you like, to actually move on to doing blue light training, and then that training takes 2 weeks. We just couldn't, as an ambulance service trust, sanction anything really like that, no.
During our investigation, we were contacted on social media by several existing members of staff at the private ambulance service.
So I can see a bug there on the floor, some description. Yeah, and that floor looks very dirty. could be a used sheet on the stretcher.
So what's happened here is they've come into work and they found this from the previous night.
Okay. Yeah, and there's another picture of some form of insect.
I mean, what do you make of that?
I mean, the patient that's got to ride in that ambulance has the right for that ambulance to be clean and in a condition that's going to support their health. Because patient transport services move some very ill and vulnerable people, and so anything that's in there that could be a source of infection could get into somebody's system and could harm them.
What do you see here? And
so I can see what looks like a two-person carry chair, and by the looks of it the foot strap is broken. And I guess the issue with things like foot straps is it's not like moving parcels or pieces of equipment. When you move people, they're unpredictable. I think certainly there is a difficulty with the staff trying to perform things like manual handling and lifting and carrying people safely, and that's a risky thing. You know, if you drop someone's parcel, doesn't matter, but if you drop someone's mother or their grandma, I mean, that's something which you can't take back, so the equipment needs to be safe. It's an absolute duty on the employer to make sure the equipment they provide is in safe working order.
The Care Quality Commission told us it found poor standards in infection control, staff not having enough time between shifts, and poor leadership arrangements during an inspection at the private ambulance service in August. A follow-up inspection found things were improving, including better cleaning procedures, and there was an action plan in place for further changes. We approached the private ambulance service for an interview. They declined and told us,
"The private ambulance service offers a high level of patient care to all patients transported on the service, and we do not accept the nature of the allegations that have been made. We outsource our blue light driver training to an approved training organisation used by the NHS. We started using our current provider in January 2016. All staff receive induction training and full training where necessary. Staff joining us from other companies have to complete clinical skills assessments and driving assessments prior to employment being offered."
The NHS East of England Ambulance Service, which uses the private ambulance service to provide cover for emergency calls, told us,
"The East of England Ambulance Service needs to use private companies to meet patient demand. These services are regulated by the CQC and are internally vetted."
He was given medication that he was allergic to.
But the solicitor representing the widow of Gary Page is worried what might happen if all the lessons aren't learnt from his death.
I'm concerned for other patients because Gary's situation, it's quite obvious he was suffering from chest pain. He should have been transported to hospital. And, you know, this is just a simple thing that shouldn't have happened. There could be other patients in similar predicaments and the same thing might happen, or more serious medical conditions that could be left, which could be devastating for other families.
That report from James Melly. If you work for a private ambulance company or you have experience of using their vehicles, do get in touch this morning. Let me read you an email from Stuart. "I worked there for nearly 2 years and I can back up the claims. I was lucky enough to have been trained by the police to drive on the blues, but when I joined the company and was assessed, I was more qualified than the assessor. Some staff were given under an hour's training to drive on the blues, which was shocking." William says this: "Your claims are quite correct. I had absolutely no driving training and I was expected to blue light immediately. I voiced my concerns, brackets, I'm a retired police traffic officer, and after 3 years I left. It was 100% unsafe and the managers do not listen." Whereas Darren says, "I worked for a private ambulance company and the blue light training I went through was for 15 days and that was done by qualified instructors." We asked the private ambulance service to talk to us today about those claims. They turned us down. In a statement, they told us they don't accept the nature of the allegations that have been made and that we outsource our blue light driver training to an approved training organisation used by the NHS. We started using our current provider in January 2016. All staff receive induction training and full training where necessary. your experience of working for private ambulance firms. Welcome, as always. Let's speak now to Alan Howson, who's Executive Chairman of the Independent Ambulance Association. It's an organisation that represents the private ambulance industry. Also with us, Will Broughton, who's a paramedic and a trustee of the College of Paramedics. And we're going to talk to Jeff Chaplin in a second. Jeff got in touch with our programme today. He's the chairman of a private ambulance firm called Human Touch. Welcome, all of you. Alan Howson, what do you think?
It's clearly unacceptable that someone would only have an hour's training to do blue light work. What I do note, though, is that at the time, that particular company were doing PTS work. This was not 999.
PTS?
It's patient transport services. It wasn't 999 support work.
Right.
So the training is very different.
OK, but this was an hour's training for blue light work?
Blue light work, as defined by subcontracted 999 calls. No, it wasn't that work. What he was saying was he was called upon from time to time to deliver patients from one hospital to another, not emergency dedicated patients.
Right, so why would you be having the blue lights on if you... I mean, you might still be having the blue lights on to transfer a patient from one hospital to another. It might also be an emergency.
Yes, and that clearly is unacceptable.
Right.
At the time that the programme was 3 weeks in length, it's now 4 weeks in length. And that's a national reference programme.
OK, but these people weren't getting 3 weeks training?
Not by the sound of it, no. And
no.
That's unacceptable, and we're not here to defend that.
OK. Will Broughton, you're a paramedic, trustee of the College of Paramedics. What do you think?
Very much agree with Alan that what's been presented here is totally unacceptable. We would expect anybody driving an ambulance under emergency conditions to have completed the 4-week nationally approved driver training programme.
Which is what the NHS what the NHS does.
Absolutely.
And which this company in Basildon now do as well. From November 2016, they brought the 4 weeks driver training in.
And I should add that private companies who are subcontracted are working to a framework set by the Ambulance Trust, and that will include reference to clinical training and driver training. They will have to provide records that their staff have been trained and certificated to those levels. OK, let me bring in Jeff then, Jeff Chaplin from Human Touch. Hi Jeff, can you hear me? Oh no, maybe we've lost him. We'll try and get him back in a moment because he is the chairman of a private ambulance company in the east of England, and he very much wants to defend the kind of work that these firms do, many of these firms do, which you would presumably echo, Alan Howson, as boss of the Independent Ambulance Association. Yes, all our members are regulated and registered with the Care Quality Commission. They're under inspection from the trusts that they work to, and that can include spot inspection, so unannounced visits to audit activity. I think there is, in terms of the rules of training, it is vague, isn't it? I know the NHS does 4 weeks driver training, but it's not compulsory, is it? That's my understanding, Will, is that right?
It's not, my understanding is not yet legally required to complete that course, but it is required by the NHS trusts that all of their own employees have completed that programme.
Right, OK. It's a broad question, Alan Howson, private ambulance firms, are they safe?
Yes, they are safe. They're registered and regulated by the same body that NHS ambulance trusts are regulated by. They're held up to the same criteria. So yes, they are safe.
Would you agree?
I would, yes. They're, as Alan said, they're all registered with the Care Quality Commission. Those paramedics working in the independent sector are all registered with the Health and Care Professions Council and meet their standards of proficiency, many of whom are members of the College of Paramedics and then meet their requirements as well.
The other claims that we heard from current and former employees were dirty vehicles, dirty ambulances and inadequate equipment. Again, I know you'll say that's unacceptable, but it's going on.
Dirty vehicles are a fact of life in ambulance work, whether it's the independent sector or whether it's the NHS. If they have a bad incident and the vehicle needs a complete declean, then it usually is put to one side, whilst a team will address that while another vehicle is readied. They are given time at the beginning of their shift to check their vehicle over, to restock where it's necessary, to check that all the facilities on the vehicle are working. being candid, if your vehicle is dirty, you would clean it if there was no other vehicle available. It's a rare occurrence, and there is a procedure for reporting such incidents.
Okay, let me read messages from people getting in touch with the programme. This is from somebody who wishes to remain anonymous. Good morning. Can I please remain anonymous because I fear reprisals from these people. I too am a former employee of the private ambulance service in Basildon. I was a team leader. I was asked to make checks on the vehicles. Most of the crews worked long hours but still had a duty of care to clean the vehicles after use. Some were cleaned ready for use, others weren't. I reported the crews that didn't clean their vehicle, but nothing ever came of it. The reports were filed in the bin. The company flaunted the rules to the highest degree. Equipment that was faulty still got sent out. Also, equipment went missing, leaving vehicles without life-saving equipment. Totally unacceptable. Debbie on Facebook says, I work for this company too, and I'm sorry to say I can back up everything. I left due to getting ill, and management would not help with any changes in my hours. Philip says, shocked and appalled that ambulance emergency service staff are given a 1-hour crash course in driving under the blue lights. This surely poses a serious threat to the ordinary road user who goes through a rigorous examination before being allowed to get behind the wheel, an accident waiting to happen. I think we have got Jeff back now. Jeff Chaplin, who's got in touch with us today. Oh, he's on the phone, that's why. Hi Jeff, can you hear us?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for getting in touch with us. You run a private company called Human Touch. First of all, what do you make about the claims that 1 hour's driver training for driving under the blue lights?
I think it's unusual. Ours is 3 weeks, so I don't understand how that could be allowed at all.
As I say, the company denied the nature of our allegations. We do know that from November last year, so a couple of months ago, they changed the way they train their drivers. They get now the 4 weeks, which is mirrored across the NHS. Tell us about your own company and the service you provide.
We provide a complete range of services, from blue light ambulances through to patient transfer services. And we provide them to a number of trusts.
And what you offer is necessary because why? Explain to our audience why.
Because the trusts actually do not have enough resources to cope. And there are holes in what they can do which we can fill.
Okay.
And
go on.
Cost is what is strangling the trusts. And we can put ambulances on the road for somewhere between 60 and 70% of their costs simply because of the massive overheads that the NHS has to carry.
Jeff, thank you very much for that. A couple more emails here. Again, somebody who wishes to remain anonymous. I've worked in the ambulance service for 10 years. Not all private services are bad. Some have better standards than the NHS. And Robert says, your piece today is inaccurate. I work for this company and I have successfully completed a 3-week intensive qualification to drive on blue lights. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
I've been getting away with it all my